Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. I hope all is well with each and every one of you and that you are safe. It's been a long 5 or 6 weeks of stay at home for everyone, and hopefully at this time next month our day-to-day lives will be returning to normal, if only in a small way. So hang in there. The battle is far from over, but as we are all aware, we have to get back to work and get the economy rolling and be safe at the same time. The sporting scene is still at a standstill. About the only thing going on has been college football recruiting. Nothing seems to stop that. Our guest today says it's been a good month for Jim Harbaugh and his staff, and we still could end up with a top 10 class by the time signing day arrives. Joining me next on our Game Day segment is Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports, here on the Michigan Man, so stay with us. Here with us on our Game Day segment this week is Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports with a recruiting update, and yes, we actually do have recruiting updates. Good to have you back with us, Steve.
Hey, Mike. Yeah, recruiting's like the only thing that hasn't really stopped since then. So they've been recruiting pretty hard.
Yeah, thank goodness. I mean, there's been no news basically regarding sports at all. We know it's at a standstill. So yes, recruiting has at least kept our attention. I thought, Steve, we could start off with Michigan's 9 hard commits as of right now. Just a quick review. I know a lot of our listeners and your readers, of course, have been keeping up on this, but just to get your thoughts on the 9 guys we have committed right now, and starting with J.J. McCarthy, and he's been committed since May of last year, so he's been around a long time. A lot of print about him. 6'2", 195, and from what everyone says, we got the real deal in this guy.
Yep, 5-star level guy, rock solid to the staff still. Yeah, like you said, until whoever their third commitment was, I think maybe it was Crippen, McCarthy had been the last commitment since before that. So they almost went a full calendar year without a 2021 commitment, which is actually kind of crazy. So, but no, McCarthy, as the cornerstone of the class, right? I mean, I believe he's the ranked quarterback they've gotten under Harbaugh. Sky high ceiling. We'll see if he's like a guy who can come in and compete right away. I suspect, you don't ever want to have to maybe rely on a true freshman to come in and compete right away, but he might be just good enough to enter that conversation on his talent alone. So I think the one thing I know our analysts are looking for to see how he physically develops heading into his senior year, or at least the calendar year, I guess, until he graduates or whatever. So that was one little thing I know they've been looking at with him, but yeah, I mean, he's the real deal. And also a guy very passionate about his commitment to the staff and has been kind of doing that whole recruiting other recruits type deal. So yeah, a great centerpiece to have in your class. It's always nice to have an elite quarterback, an elite nationally visible quarterback committed to your staff. So really can't say enough about how important he is for them right now.
Yeah, and he likes to talk. He doesn't mind telling you what he thinks about Ohio State either, does he?
No. It's a weird, the 2021 quarterback deal, very fascinating, carousel, because, Ohio State, he was actually pretty interested in Ohio State. Michigan came in, Notre Dame was involved too. Ohio State kind of moved forward with a kid named Kyle McCord, he's ranked lower than McCarthy, but not much lower. I mean, he's also an elite quarterback prospect. But yeah, right now there's a kid named Miller Moss out of Walnut Hills, California, I believe is where he's from. Is a top 50 prospect in the country. I think Michigan could have easily gotten him if they had not taken McCarthy. And he's down to Alabama, USC, UCLA, and I think LSU or something like that. So Michigan, almost no matter what, I think was going to end up with a big-time guy in this class. But McCarthy, yeah, it was really weird how it panned out. You had Tyler Buckner commit to Notre Dame, and then you had McCord commit to Ohio State, and McCarthy was kind of there. I had a hunch the first time I talked to him that he was really going to like Michigan, and he also has somebody on his high school staff who's pretty high on Michigan, and that hunch kind of turned out to be correct. So, really funky kind of cycle for Michigan at quarterback, at least back then, because they almost had their choice of two like really big time options, because Moss is an amazing quarterback prospect too.
Well, since we last talked, which was I think in early March, we've had several commits. One of them has been a local kid that you and I have talked about, Giovanni El-Hadi. He's from Sterling Heights, Stevenson. He's an offensive tackle. He committed on the 19th of March. 6'5", 285. Talk about him for a minute.
So Gio's been committed for a long time as well. I think a 5-star potential guy too. He's not quite ranked in the 5-star range right now, but he's steadily has moved up throughout. He's sort of the, would you say like trying to think of a good comparable. I wouldn't say quite Mason Cole. He doesn't quite have that versatility, I think, but he could project a tackle or guard. I mean, the difference with Cole is that he could have played any 5 positions on the field at offensive line. With El-Hadi, I think he's tackle or guard. That may depend on how Michigan finishes out up front, where his future might be. But another guy, actually was a guy when Michigan offered, he had had a decent amount of offers. I think he was starting to kind of get some momentum. Michigan came in, that's the offer he'd always wanted. It's kind of one of those types of deals, quick decision. And yeah, ever since then, his ranking has taken off. I mean, he was at the Under Armour Future 50 a few months ago, did really well. So yeah, he sits somewhere like in the top 75, I think. And as a guy, again, I mean, depending if he has a senior season and his film is good, because I believe he'll be at one of the All-Star games, he'll have ample opportunity for those who care if he moves up or not, to do that. So, but again, you have El-Hadi and McCarthy were the two guys that committed early to build around. You can't really ask for a much better start there. A potential tackle to protect the 5-star quarterback.
Well, April's been a pretty good month for us. It started on April 2nd, I think, with Lewis Hansen, tight end from St. Sebastian's in Needham, Massachusetts, 6'4", 222. I've seen some tape on him. Looks like a pretty nice player.
Yeah, so plays basketball, which is one of the things that Michigan and a lot of schools around the country seem to look at. Not necessarily basketball, but that they excel in another sport. He was right there with Thomas Fedone and Brock Bowers at the time as guys who I think the staff were probably their top 3 targets at tight end. So for them to get Hansen this early, I think was a pretty significant pull. Massachusetts again, Michigan, obviously it's clear investing a lot of resources and a lot of time into trying to take the best kids out of the state of Massachusetts. I think Boston College hates Michigan right now because of what they're doing in Massachusetts. So, another nice pull. Of course, naturally, people want to compare him to Sean McCune because they're both from Massachusetts, but I actually like Hansen's film more than I did McCune. McCune was recruited because he had a really good, off-season camp. His athletic numbers, his testing numbers were really strong. Hansen has good testing numbers, but he also has what I think is pretty darn good film too. So, yeah, that's a nice one for them. I mean, they only took the one tight end last cycle in Hibner, missed on Theo Johnson late, and then I think kind of banged that thinking that they really, really need to take 2 this cycle. So to get Hansen in the boat early allows them to maybe pursue, Fedone is really the guy that they're after, but to maybe focus on some other guys for that second spot.
Well, on April 12th, we hit the Cass Tech pipeline again. Raheem Anderson, 6'3", 298, offensive center, and he looks like the real deal, doesn't he?
So this is one I think, yeah, Michigan. So Greg Crippen, who we haven't talked about yet, committed earlier than Anderson did. Crippen could project a center. I think when he committed, I think the big question was, would that shut Anderson out? Because I think the sense was always that Anderson favored Michigan. I think that was the smartest decision Michigan has made this cycle, was still staying the course with Anderson, because I think he's going to be a really, really good player. I think he's a potential future captain type guy. Great story about him that I was reading was that he showed up to Cass Tech as a true freshman and said that he was going to take whoever's job, whoever their center was at the time. He said, I'm going to come in here and take this guy's job, and he did. So he'd be a 4-year, again, if they play this season, he'll be a 4-year starter at center, and I believe will at least be a 2-time captain. I assume he'll be a captain this year, but I don't remember if he was one as a sophomore or not. But really, just one of those guys. I know their staff couldn't say enough good things about him. And I thought his film was really, really good. So that, as far as that's an in-state guy to me. If you're Michigan, you need to take that kind of guy. 4-star level kid at a program like Cass Tech where you've done so well at, who, has the makeup and the ability to kind of be a leader up front, for your guys. So, that was good. That was good because, like I said, when they took Crippen, I think there was a question on whether or not Anderson, if there was room for him, if they would take two guys who could project the center. And you got to remember they took Reese Atterbury last cycle, who some people think might project the center as well. So, but in my opinion, the right move. I think Anderson is a guy that will play a lot of football at Michigan.
You've mentioned Greg Crippen. He's the other center, of course, an IMG Academy kid, 6'4", 285. He committed, as you mentioned earlier, on the 25th of March. His coach down there at IMG Academy just thinks he's going to walk in and play center, but he thinks he can move around too. Very talented kid, another great get.
Yes. So Crippen was committed to Notre Dame for a while. That kind of slowed down a little. I mean, I'd be remiss not to just say it felt like Notre Dame was okay with him reopening his recruitment for whatever reason. To me, that's always can be one of the fascinating aspects of recruiting. Is like Notre Dame, for lack of better terms, seemed to kind of cool on him a little bit, despite even being committed. Yeah, Walter, who's about to produce potentially 4 NFL draft picks this week, from last year's unit, who likes this guy a lot, and sometimes it's the nuance between why does, because Notre Dame's produced how many offensive linemen in the last 5 or 6 years, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, where's the nuance, where Notre Dame's kind of like, okay, letting this guy go, but Michigan really wants him. That's some of the stuff that I always find kind of fascinating. So, Crippen, he was committed to Notre Dame for a while. He showed up for, I believe, the season opener last year at Michigan against Middle Tennessee. And at the time we thought he was going to flip to Michigan quickly after that. He didn't. He reopened from Notre Dame, I'll say like a few weeks before he committed to Michigan, maybe a little bit longer. But after he decommitted from Notre Dame, I think Michigan was pretty much a foregone conclusion. That's where he was going to go. Yes, he has more versatility than Anderson. I think that's kind of the key there, is that he's the guy who could play guard if necessary. Anderson, I don't see playing any position besides center. I think he's a center all the way. So, Crippen's versatility will probably allow him. I mean, those two will battle at center. I'll just say with Anderson, I don't see him playing anywhere else up front except in the middle. So, that'll be an interesting dynamic there. But yeah, another 4-star guy. I'm trying to think of who else he had offers from. I want to say Auburn, and somebody else offered after he decommitted from Notre Dame. So there are a lot of other staffs out there who like, what he has to do. And playing at a school like IMG, there's always going to be good film on a kid like that because they're playing against top-notch competition every weekend. So, Ed Warner's done a really good job again this cycle.
Last week we picked up a kid from Mansfield, Massachusetts, TJ Guy. Was on the 17th of April. 6'4", 240, a wide side defensive end. Talk about him for a minute.
So far in the class, he's the kind of guy. He's what I would call sort of the sleeper guy of the class so far. I think he's a guy who, his last name's Guy. I shouldn't go. He's a guy. He's literally a guy. But he's a player who I think really has a high ceiling on the defensive side of the football. He's also somebody Michigan. And this is one of those things. Is you see the higher ranked, the 4-star type guys. Every cycle, there's like two separate categories. There's the really, really underranked guys that Michigan, I feel like, sort of, I want to say rolls the dice with, but kinda. Then there are like guys who Michigan legitimately believes are like top target level players. Trying to think DJ Turner was one in 2019 who was like a 3-star the entire cycle, but Michigan, he was near the top of their cornerback board the entire year. Jamon Green, same thing at cornerback the year before. 3-star guy the whole way, but Michigan loved him. This is sort of in that vein, where this is somebody who Michigan truly believes is a potential big-time guy up front. And so, that's where, they've been on him for months. And he was committed to Boston College, kind of like Crippen. When he opened it back up, the only question was, as long as Michigan would take him, that felt like that's where he was going to go. So our guys, Bryce Merritt, who does a really good job at Michigan Insider for us, was pretty much all over this one. Got a good vibe that Michigan really was high on him, so it was interesting. Our national guy Steve Wilfong actually dropped a note on our board a few days ago from a different college coach who said that they think TJ Guy is an offensive lineman, and said that if he switched to the offensive side of the ball and played offensive tackle, that he could play double-digit years in the NFL. So, yeah, so at the very least, you're getting that, like, there are others out there, many out there, Michigan obviously included, that think that he has, like, pro potential in some capacity. You know, my thought is, if there's one college coach out there who thinks he can play in the pros on the offensive line, and Michigan likes him that much on the defensive line, you know, they must really feel like he can play. So yeah, of the guys they've taken so far, definitely would consider him sort of the sleeper of the class as far as a guy who I think could really outperform his ranking.
Well, as you mentioned a few minutes ago, the Boston College must really not like Michigan. And earlier in April, on the 3rd of April, Michigan got a commit from Casey Finney, kid out of Dedham, Massachusetts, a linebacker, inside linebacker, 6'1", 225, another really nice player, Steve.
Yeah, so this one was a surprise to us when it happened. You know, we've had a pretty good beat on the linebacker board. Was not a name we'd heard a lot of. I had to go back and look. Michigan was recruiting him as of like last October. That was the last time I had checked in with him, but they had been consistent in their contact with him, which, you know, September 1st each year is when when the schools can contact junior prospects. So contact in October, good idea that they were still recruiting him, but not a name we'd heard a lot about. Hasn't visited Michigan yet, still hasn't. Obviously he's not going to anytime soon, or, you know, in the next month or so. This is one, I guess, just strictly from a recruiting profile standpoint, when you see who offered, who was recruiting him, this is sort of one of those roll the dice type deals. I don't want that to sound like negative necessarily, because, you know, again, I'm still in the idea that if Don Brown offers you, I think there's obviously something out there you can play. And I think his film, our East Coast guy, has left open the possibility that he would move up, you know, with a good senior season on film. He's kind of your classic inside, like, middle linebacker style guy. You know, I think the question will be, is he fast enough to play at a high level in the Big Ten? You know, because he's got a lot of really good traits on his film. Obviously, a thumper, not afraid to hit, you know, plays hard. And he's motivated. You know, I mean, that's the other thing that's what stinks for some of these, like, guys who are lower ranked, is you get the fans all get up in a tizzy, and you have him 2 days after he, you know, maybe childhood dream comes true, he commits to Michigan, he's already having to talk about proving the doubters wrong, which the doubters are the fans of the team that he just committed to. Kind of stinks. You know, it's kind of a crappy feeling, I would think. So, you know, always root for those guys in that regard. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it's clear as day. Now they're not afraid. They think kids in Massachusetts can play. I mean, that's one of the if that hasn't been made crystal clear at this point, then it is now. I mean, they're not afraid to go into a place where, you know, high school football isn't everything, or isn't scouted, you know, from top to bottom, and they're not afraid to go in and take a guy. They offered him 2 years ago. Now, offers can be committable. Sometimes they're not committable. And within those 2 years, you know, he didn't really pick up a lot of even the regional offers. Like, that's one where Boston College actually hadn't offered him a scholarship. So the detractors, or, you know, are the natural question is, well, if Boston College, who, you know, to be honest, like Michigan, a higher caliber football program than Boston College is, you know, if they weren't interested enough to offer, like, what level guy is this, you know? So that's where the questions can kind of creep in. But again, I mean, they've done this every cycle. You look at Kwity Paye at the time, I think was rated very similarly. Again, not a guarantee that this guy turns into an all Big Ten player like Kwity Paye, but still some leeway when how they approach this type of deal. And then the other thing too that I always try to have to tell people is taking this commitment specifically, and a couple of the others are not affecting the pursuits of any of the other names that, like, people are maybe clamoring for, or, you know, really, really want to go after. So that's kind of the other thing is they're always going to take some chances from a recruiting ranking standpoint, and B, it never affects their pursuit of, like, the top guys on the board that we're always writing about.
Well, the next kid, and I'm not sure how you pronounce this out of Mater Dei in Jersey, Dominic, how do you pronounce that last name, Steve?
Guiadice, I think.
We talked about TJ Guy earlier. He is listed as a defensive end, and as we talked about, could play other places. But this kid is 6'4", 250. He's a defensive end. He committed on the 25th of March. How do you like him?
So he's in that same vein as Finney, although I would even argue Finney, a much more refined college prospect. This is another one we had never even had ever heard of him, to be honest. He was offered, I mean, the day he committed was the day he was offered a scholarship by the staff. So, similar in that he lives 20 minutes from Piscataway, and to our knowledge, Rutgers hadn't camped there. They hadn't shown him like any kind of interest at all. Yeah, I mean, this one's the ultimate unknown of the guys that they've taken so far. The competition he plays at the area of New Jersey he plays at. The competition's not like spectacular, so he can look dominant on film at times, but there is the question of competition. These are, again, I'm to the point now, these ones are the fascinating ones to me. Like this is a guy, like, I'm really fascinated to see how this turns out, because like I said, and this is a Jim, this was a 100%. I don't even know if this was a Don Brown as much as it was a Jim Harbaugh call to go in and offer and take. Because like I said, it's one thing to extend the offer. It's another to take on the same day from a kid that had never even seen campus, and like I said, I think fans probably just have to get used to the fact that Harbaugh is going to do this every cycle, like with one or two guys, every year, get around this time of the year, maybe a little bit later, there are always a few guys in the class where you kind of have to be like, we didn't know a lot about this guy, and that it's just a fact at this point. I mean, I think the pattern is clear enough now to where you just have to assume it's going to happen. He has the motor. He's got good motor skills. He's got strong hands at the point of attack. I know that's one thing when we watched that we saw, but again, just fascinating to me for Michigan to take this early too, to take a commitment from somebody who really, had not very high college interest from almost anybody. Yeah. I mean, and again, this is just a fact. That's not an opinion at all. I mean, you look at his recruiting profile, I think he had a couple MAC offers, which again, there are guys that play in the MAC that get drafted high every year. So that's not a, bad thing or anything, but just fascinating to me. I mean, like I said, these are the ones that I like to follow close when they get to campus, and let's try to listen for and see how they're performing and stuff. But yeah, it's just not affecting any of the top guys they're going after on the edge. So really just kind of a fun one, I think, to follow, because again, another kid I'm sure who probably feels like he's got a lot of doubters in the own fan base that he committed to. So one I'm excited to learn more about. We haven't really talked to him a ton since he committed, but that's one that we'll dig on and get a lot of good info on, I'm sure.
Well, the last of the 9 verbals that we have right now, Steve, is Tommy Doman. He's out of Orchard Lake St. Mary's, a punter. I think he's considered, I don't know if it's based on these kicking camps, but the number 2 punter in the country. Is that right?
I think so. I think it's Cornblue. I think is usually who I know. It's funny. We've been wondering when he committed, why 24/7 why we haven't put more effort into ranking specialists. Yeah. There's really no reason why we haven't. Right. And so, so always you got to take a specialist on scholarship. It's usually every 2 cycles or so. I think Brad Robbins was in 18, like Nordine was in 16, Robbins was in 18. I mean, Hart's on scholarship now as well. But yeah, I mean, this is a necessity. I think people underestimate, really, I think these commitments kind of get overlooked a little bit, because how often you watch, special teams and the ability to punt the football is just so important. In a long, 4-quarter game, so if you get one of the best guys in the country to do that, I don't see how it's much different than getting one of the best receivers or getting one of the best, defensive ends or something like that. Because at the end of the day, these guys more often than not are going to play a huge role in a lot of big games, with their ability to stretch the field and to flip field position potentially, that type of stuff. So yeah, he was right in their backyard. I mean, I think he had double-digit scholarship offers. Most of them were not big time programs, but I mean there were some good programs in there. I want to say he had a couple ACC offers. I know Air Force had just offered, and then a lot of the regional area like MAC schools and that type of deal. But any specialist who's picking up double-digit scholarship offers is usually pretty legitimate. So, I never look at any time they move forward with a specialist as far as the scholarship goes, good indication that they can play, or that that their film so far proves that they can play. So yeah, quietly an underrated. The punter's never going to get talked about, as far as the grand scheme of the class. But like I said, I always look at it like if you're getting one of the 2 or 3 best punters in the country in your class, it's not a ton different than getting one of the best guys at any other position on the field, because it is an important position.
Here with us on our Game Day segment this week, as we once again talk about recruiting, which is popping right now, is Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports. So we've just talked about the 9 verbal commits we have so far in this class of 21. There are so many others out there, offers, undecideds. I just picked some names, well, actually about 9 or 10 names, that I get questions about a lot from listeners. Number 1 is Donovan Edwards, running back, West Bloomfield, 5'11", 193. And, of course, we heard a lot of talk about Donovan Edwards in Ohio State recently until their last commit. Is your crystal ball still on Michigan for this kid, Steve?
Actually, I'd have to check. I don't think I have a crystal ball on him right now. I might have done the thing like a month ago where I wrote that I was putting in a crystal ball, but then I never put it in.
Okay.
Because I always like to put them in, and then I don't publicly post it, because I like our subscribers to get like a little bit of a scoop off of it, and then a lot of times I just forget to put it in. Like I'd have so many more correct if I'd actually just put the stupid thing in after I say I'm going to put it in. But yeah, I mean, Michigan, Georgia. So what'll be interesting here to me is because Michigan, I think you'd argue, especially from a perception standpoint, he's the number 1 guy on the board. I mean, he's the borderline 5-star back right in your backyard. They need running backs. They've gotten the 2 guys they wanted the last 2 cycles in Charbonnet and Corum, but those are the only 2 they've signed. They need, it's actually a pretty big need, despite, going into this season right now, they have a really young and really talented room. You need bodies there, from a depth standpoint. So in that regard, I think he's probably the top target on their recruiting board, period. Michigan, Georgia, Ohio State were the ones, and then Ohio State picked up 2 running backs within like a 7 or 8 day span. I don't think Ohio State's an option anymore. So if you continue to hear Michigan and Georgia, it'll be interesting. What'll be a bigger deal to me is if you start to see like other programs kind of enter the mix, because then I think doubt will maybe start to creep in, is that maybe he just doesn't want to go to Michigan. Not trying to plant any seeds of doubt or anything, because I know Michigan's going all out. If you force me to choose, I still think they just end up getting him. They just need him too badly. They're right in the backyard. He'd have a legit chance to play early, I would think. So, and plus, Georgia's gotten so many running backs the last couple cycles. It's like, just even from the depth chart standpoint, I don't see how you would choose Michigan over Georgia right now, but or how you choose Georgia over Michigan. But so it'll be an interesting one. I think he's going to slow things down like a lot of kids are. There's 2 things going on right now. Either guys are getting, in my opinion, bored and committing to schools, or they're just slowing the process way, way down and kind of waiting to see if there's a season, if they can take official visits, like that type of deal. So, but yeah, West Bloomfield, 5-star back. Michigan's got to be involved, right? So, it's going to be an interesting one, though. I think, this is the type of recruitment, though, that if he goes elsewhere, Michigan's going to get a lot of flack for not closing the deal. Even if they end up signing like 2 backs that they really, really like, still, if they still get 2 of their top guys at the position to finish out, if one of them's not him, they're going to catch a lot of flack for it, because the idea that you need a back and you have one right in your backyard who's in our rankings the number 2 in the country, how do you not get that guy?
To me, he's a must-get for Michigan, so yeah, we'll see how that plays out. But another kid I think that's right up there with fans locally that have seen him play really wanting to commit is Rocco Spindler, 6'5", 290, offensive guard from Clarkston, Michigan, just north of Detroit. I think he tweeted or somehow messaged the other day, Steve, that he is really impressed with Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Michigan. Any indication where he might be leaning of those 3?
I'd still be surprised if it wasn't Notre Dame or Michigan. Penn State, I know, was trying to push too. Ohio State has quietly been hanging around in this one, and that's, always a cause for concern or reason for pause with the level that they're recruiting at right now. But just based on how this has played out and the amount of effort, I feel like Michigan, Notre Dame, I would place as a top 2. That's just what we've been told and have felt for months. this would be one where I think Michigan fans may be a little frustrated. There's a couple recruitments out there like this right now. I think 3 or 4 months ago, I would have considered him a super heavy lean to Michigan. That lead, I think, has kind of slipped away a little bit. Not saying that they may still lead. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But I think there's more doubt now than there was. Notre Dame has done a really good job. Well, we talked earlier about Crippen, where both these programs have kind of produced some good offensive linemen. But if you're honest, between Quentin Nelson, Zach Martin, 2 of the best interior linemen in the NFL right now played for Notre Dame, and they were there within the last 5 years. I mean, they have a very, very strong pitch to somebody in his position. So I don't know what the question will be as far as, because Notre Dame, Michigan, we notice recruit a lot of the same type of players. Does it come down to the whole, because the campus is as similar as they are academically and with their approach in recruiting and trying to take high academic guys or guys that are focused on academics, their campuses are wildly different. So it's always interesting to see who prefers what over the other. I mean, in my opinion, they are. I mean, Notre Dame to me just feels like it's a straight up private school feel, in the middle of nowhere. And Ann Arbor is much more of your classic college town, right? So, always interesting if that makes a difference or not, because it is. I think there are certain kids gravitate towards each one. Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, but yeah, he's right up there with Edwards, I think, as far as just from a perception standpoint. I mean, we just talked about, Michigan's got 3 guys right now, all ranked 4-star, who could play in the 2 will play interior line. The other one could in El Hadi potentially. They already got pretty good stuff going on in the interior line, but I mean, if they miss Spindler, then all of a sudden it's a failure, So, it'll just be interesting to see how they close. But I still think Michigan or Notre Dame. I'd be surprised if Ohio State or Penn State was the choice at the end of the day.
Well, another kid that I get a lot of emails on, another local guy, is Jamari Budden, outside linebacker from Belleville. Outstanding program just off 94, west of Detroit. 6'2", 210. Are we in pretty good shape with this kid, Steve?
So he's the other one I was talking about if you'd asked me 3 or 4 months ago, he's one I would have even gone further than with Spindler's. Like, I think Budden was as close to a lock as you can get. But his is one where the lead has definitely slipped away too. And for this one, it's Penn State. And what's been interesting about this one is, so Penn State picked up 3 commitments from kids in the Detroit area in the last month. They got the King twins out of Cass Tech, Kalen and Kobe. Kalen, a cornerback who Michigan really, really liked. And then Kobe, inside linebacker type. And then Jalen Reed out of Detroit King, who we have as ranked as a 4-star prospect, 24/7 Sports, but Michigan did not offer. The kid did not very happy that Michigan did not offer a scholarship. It's just probably putting it mildly, actually. And so now Penn State has 3 guys that I think that Budden is relatively close with, who are not just in his ear about going to Penn State, but are in his ear about, bad about Michigan, negatively about Michigan specifically. So I think this has turned into a really intense Michigan-Penn State battle. Budden, again, another guy that's been a top target for them for a long time, I think is sort of their top target at that Viper spot. And I actually think, just from his ability, the way his film looks and stuff, he's one of the better, just classic. I think he fits that Viper spot better than a lot of the guys they've recruited in the past, because some of them have been athletic, but maybe a little undersized. I think he's got a little more of both. I think he's got the size and the athleticism to play that position at a pretty high level. So, yeah, I mean, this is one for sure. Now, I do have a crystal ball in there. This is one 3 or 4 months ago I would have said, if you'd asked me the top 5 guys most likely to commit to Michigan, he'd have been in there somewhere for sure. But now I think it's in somewhat doubt. This one will be interesting to me because, I said, Penn State has really made the Detroit area a major priority. I know one of their assistants, Tim Banks, I believe is from Detroit, and I believe played at Detroit King, if I'm not mistaken. So they do have a guy from the area, that's really putting in a lot of effort. So, it's kind of sort of been a thorn in their side. And so it'll be interesting with Budden. But, yeah, Michigan, Penn State for sure. He's still, he's interested in other programs, but I'd be shocked if it wasn't one of those 2.
Well, Belleville High School, as most of us know in the Metro Detroit area, has really, over the last decade, I think it's fair to say, an elite program and a lot of D1 talent coming out of there. Another kid that we're in on, I don't know if I wrote this down right, was it Ramir Lewis?
They're not really recruiting him, Mike.
Because I know he's a big kid. Boy, 6'7", 330, but really big kid. So he's one I get questions on, too. The other one I haven't heard a lot of talk about lately is Rayshawn Benny, 6'5", 270.
Okay.
Offensive tackle from Oak Park. Where are we with this kid?
Michigan's recruiting Benny at defensive tackle. So, yeah, he's listed as an offensive tackle on our site. And I want to say the vast majority of schools that are recruiting him offensively. Michigan kind of going against the grain a little bit. And as you know, anybody who's talked about or read a Michigan recruiting site in the last year is like Michigan needs to take 18 defensive tackles this cycle it's ridiculous, the overreaction to them not recruiting like 4 defensive tackles every cycle. But it is a legit need in this class, though. And Benny, probably the number 1 or 2 guy for them at that position. Oak Park, there's been a lot of talk about how Michigan has had problems getting the elite guys out of Belleville. You talk about Dobbs, Barnett. Yeah. They're not going to get Damon Payne. Actually, quietly, Oak Park is another program where Michigan has not recruited their elite talent very well. As a matter of fact, I feel like Michigan, it's almost to the point where Michigan does not really recruit a lot of the Oak Park kids super hard for whatever reason. You look last cycle, they kind of recruited Justin Rogers. He's a really highly ranked guy, but they didn't. Marquand McCall, same deal a couple cycles ago. They did recruit Malik Carr for a decent amount last year, but then that cooled off really, really quickly. But with Benny, it's different. Benny is a guy they're recruiting big time. His recruitment's been kind of a mystery. I had to do a piece on the Free Press about his recruitment, and they asked me, I'm supposed to predict where they're going to go. I could not, in good faith, actually predict, because I don't think there's really any serious indication of where he's going to go. The 4 schools that we hear the most about are Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and then Iowa, who quietly I think is a legitimate factor. If you throw those 4 schools in there, you think, Iowa's got to be 4th. I wouldn't necessarily say that here. I think he's got legitimate interest there. So be a good test for Sean Nua, because, again, he basically, Michigan approached him and asked him what side of the ball he wanted to play on. Mm-hmm. And he told them he preferred defense. So your thought is, again, highly ranked in-state guy. Michigan does need defensive tackles, despite my joke about taking 18 a cycle. They do need them. The depth chart is right there. You'd think that it's a perfect match, but I don't think it's a slam dunk by any means. I think this one will be interesting. What's kind of crazy is, I think he's top. I think he got a huge bump in the last rank. He's a top 150 guy. Ohio State may not have room for him. That's how well they're recruiting up front on both sides right now, is that they may not have room for him. And he's got 35 offers and is ranked in the top 150. That's really a big question on their end about it, because I think Ohio State would be right there near the top, if not at the top, if they had the room. So, and then, like I said, you got Penn State, who's growing a presence in Detroit. I think Tim Banks is the name of the assistant. I forgot earlier, but he is from Detroit. So they're a factor too. But this one I think is kind of completely up in the air. Mom seems to really like Michigan, though. I think that might matter. But, yeah, it's just an interesting Oak Park never really gets mentioned a lot when it comes to, people want to criticize Michigan's in-state recruiting and not getting enough of the top guys. And it's always about Belleville. It's been very similar at Oak Park. Enzo Jennings, he was the one committed to Penn State and signed with them last cycle. Michigan really didn't even recruit him for whatever reason. Odd situation at Oak Park, but Benny is a big-time target for them, and I would argue probably their number 1 defensive tackle target for sure.
Well, I have a couple of Grand Rapids listeners who are just really on me about this Jace Williams, the wide receiver, who they think he's a great player. 6'3", 185, sort of that long, lean receiver I think that Michigan wants some more of. I haven't seen much on him or heard much about him, but what do you think of this kid?
So I like him. Well, he's got about 15, 17 offers. I think he's got close to 20 offers. Now, actually, it's interesting you brought him up. He's the type of guy that this virus deal may really hurt, because he's the type of kid I'm convinced is one that Michigan would have invited to their camp, and that's where he would have had by far his best shot to earn an offer from the staff. Because you're right, they are looking much more at the outside type receivers this cycle. They've loaded up on guys on the inside, the Hennings and the Sainristills Stills and the Giles Jackson type guys. They want to get longer at the receiver position this cycle. To me, he's a perfect example. Couldn't have brought up a better example, really, of somebody who probably would have camped at some of these bigger programs this summer and probably earned a few more offers, with Michigan being a possibility. But now with these camps in flux, unless they just push the calendar back and hold camps like in the late summer or early fall. I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how they would do it or whatever, but that he's the kind of guy I think that this situation really could possibly hurt, because again, he's already has some legit offers and will have a place to go no matter what. When you talk about Michigan or Penn State or Notre Dame type deal, because I don't think he has any of those three, you know, that's the type of situation where it stinks for a guy like that, because I think Michigan, I know that, well, I mean, obviously they are well aware of what happened with GRCC with Jalen Mayfield, right? So that he's definitely a kid on their radar. So, yeah, would have been a guy, like, because right now their wide receiver board seems relatively set, you know, and he's not a guy that we've heard a lot about Michigan-wise, but I guarantee he's a guy that they would have asked to camp. And that when that happened in camp, they've usually gotten like at least one commitment from their summer camp almost every year. And so, you know, he's the kind of guy, again, with double-digit offers, multiple Big Ten offers, you know, is a guy I think would have been I'm not going to say he was going to go in and get an offer for sure, but he's a guy that would have competed for one for sure. Now that they're not happening, it's kind of like all they'll have to go off of is the same junior film that they probably already evaluated, you know. So that's where it kind of gets stinky for a lot of the guys who maybe want to get those next tier offers, you know, where it's like from the school standpoint, it's like, well, we already evaluated what we have. We can't see, you know, a lot of times working one-on-one personally with a kid can really make a big difference in learning what their ability is and, you know, what they can offer. But yeah, so I think it feels like I think Northwestern, I think is a school I feel like I've heard mentioned with him a lot. Right. So, you know, either way, I think he's going to play football in the Big Ten. If I was to guess right now, I wouldn't say it'd be Michigan.
Well, we talked about the running back deal. I mean, right now the running back room's very talented. Of course, we'd like to get Donovan Edwards. There's another running back in Michigan I get questions on, Tyus Anthony. He's from over in Portage Northern, and not a school that I think we've recruited much at. Nice area of the state. 6 foot, 208-pound running back, again from Portage Northern. I don't know much about this kid, Steve. What do you think?
Michigan's been in contact there a while ago. Probably in a really similar spot where he definitely would have been asked to camp this summer. Now, he's one I know that Michigan's been in contact with, and they like him. The question I was wondering is if Michigan State's new staff was going to offer him, because he had a scholarship offer under D'Antonio's staff, and I'm not sure if Tucker's staff has offered him again yet. I'd have to look. But another guy where, I know Michigan likes him, actually. I could say that for a fact. He's not a guy they were looking to offer yet. And as a guy, again, I mean, would have been perfect for a camp situation or a senior film type deal. I would almost have bet he'd have gotten invited to home games or will get invited to home games this year. So he's a name I wouldn't put away for Michigan necessarily. But they do have their top board set. You talk about Donovan Edwards. You talk about Corey Kiner out of Cincinnati. Talk about AJ Green out of Tulsa is another kid there they love. Prophet Brown way out in Elk Grove, California, another guy they're really high on. So, you know, they have like a pretty set board. They just offered other 3 or 4 other guys a couple weeks ago too that they really like. But he's, again, those in-state guys who are like kind of on the cusp are guys that almost always are asked to camp, and then they go from there with it and see. So he's a good running back, though. I remember watching his film. I mean, it's been a while, but I did watch his film after I found out that Michigan had evaluated him. And he also looks like a Big Ten caliber player. So I suspect, again, like Jace, he'll be playing in the Big Ten in some capacity. It'll just be a matter of where. I couldn't say like it's going to be Michigan though for sure right now.
Well, another kid that's a long, lean receiver type, and we just talked about Jace Williams, is Andrew Anthony from East Lansing. He's 6'2", 175. Another kid I haven't heard a lot about, Steve. I get quite a few emails on him. Talk about what you think of him.
So he's a legit target for them. We've had him listed as top target for a while. I know when the winter evaluation period came, I think it was all 3 of Harbaugh, Sharon Moore, Josh Gaddis all went and watched him play basketball at East Lansing High School. His is another one that's going to be really interesting. Again, East Lansing, under D'Antonio's staff, Michigan would have beaten them for his services. But with a new staff in there, you always got to kind of wonder, they're going to obviously make him a huge priority. That'll be interesting. He's another one that likes Penn State. Penn State seems to be recruiting him pretty hard. Minnesota, too. This is one where Minnesota's actually, I think, a little bit of a factor with PJ Fleck, who they've actually been recruiting at a pretty high level so far this cycle. I mean, Fleck was a great recruiter at Western Michigan, kind of starting to turn into that at Minnesota. He's recruiting some pretty high-level guys. And then also Notre Dame is another one. I'm not 100% sure how high Notre Dame is on him right now, but I do know that they're involved. But for Michigan, I mean, he's right up there near the top. I'd say he's the top 2 or 3 target for them at receiver right now. Guys like Xavier Worthy out of Fresno, California, another one they really, really like. A few other guys too. So, I don't know. That's one I couldn't call right now. Kind of another one where I think the early feel was Michigan, but not in the same vein as, say, like we talk about with Button or something like that. There was never felt like it was imminent that he was going to commit. Just felt like he was maybe feeling Michigan a little bit more than the other schools. But his seems kind of open at this point. And Penn State, Minnesota, Michigan, Michigan State, maybe Notre Dame.
Well, these are just a few of the undecideds we've offered, Steve, that I get the most email about, so I threw them out there. But I know we have plenty of offers out there. Who are some of the other undecideds we are in on that you think we have a good chance of landing?
A couple guys. There's David Koff out of New Trier, Illinois, is a top 100 offensive lineman. I'd say that's Michigan or Iowa. Right now, Wisconsin probably still involved. I think Ohio State is too, but Michigan or Iowa seem to be leading the pack there. Like I see we talked about earlier, Ed Warner just doing an amazing job. I mean, we went into the cycle thinking Michigan would probably take 4 offensive linemen at most. They're in such a good spot with so many guys. We could actually see them taking 6 right now and basically solidifying their offensive line for the next 4 years. I mean, because you think about what they took in 19 with the 6 guys they got there, and then they took 3 that they liked last cycle. That's 15 guys in 3 classes. I mean, that's a statement to solidify yourself up front for the foreseeable future. And they would not increase a number like 4 to 6 unless they felt really good about the guys that they were taking. So he's one. Talked a little bit about AJ Green out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. I think is a running back that they really, really like. Speedster, fits Gaddis' scheme perfectly. Obviously Oklahoma involved there, Oklahoma State. I don't know if LSU is the other school. There's a few other programs too, but Michigan's been on him like crazy. I'm trying to think what safety. I know the kid named Donovan McMillan out of Cannonsburg, Pennsylvania. We just bumped him up to a 4-star ranking. He was sitting at a 3-star for a while. But we knew he was a 4-star level guy. I mean, he's got 38 offers, 39 offers or something. Bob Shoop's actually, I think, done one of the things he was similar, actually, so far. It's not quite the same, but when Warner got hired, the knock on Warner was that he was awesome, like one of the top 3 or 4 position coaches in the country, or at least top 3 or 4 offensive line coaches in the country, but that he wasn't really a grinder on the recruiting trail.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same deal we heard with Shoop, because really, 2 years ago, Mississippi State had the number 3 defense in the country when he was DC. I mean, in my opinion, Michigan hired basically a second defensive coordinator to their staff. I mean, the guy can coach. Question was, he wasn't really an aggressive recruiter. He was on John Jansen's podcast and basically said that he knew, being in an assistant role, that he had to pick it up big time on the recruiting trail. And so far he has, with McMillan being one of the main guys. Another kid is Ryan Barnes out of Gaithersburg, Maryland, plays at Quince Orchard, which is a really good high school program out there. Michigan actually just offered his younger brother yesterday. It was his first offer, which is a dead giveaway that Michigan really wants the older brother. I mean, no offense to the younger kid who may end up being a legitimate prospect, but if we know where you're after a guy and then you're the first scholarship offer for his younger brother, that's as good an indication as you're going to get that they really want this kid. So Ryan Barnes, another name to look at defensive back. Tyreek Chappell out of Philly, a guy that Mike Zordich naturally, a lot of experience in Philly, is after. I think Michigan's somewhere in the top 5 there. I'm trying to think anywhere else. Tight end, Thomas Fidone, actually, probably a name to mention.
Yeah.
Number 1 tight end in the country. He's been their number 1 target at the position the whole cycle. Other great thrown more. Michigan actually offered him really early, and now he's number 1 tight end in the country. I think he was like an 87 or something when they offered him. Now he's like close to a 5-star. So great evaluation there by the Michigan staff. Michigan, Nebraska, Iowa, Notre Dame, Penn State. I think LSU is actually the other school in his top 6. Those are some of the names. It's been an interesting class. I think you took the first day, the first 2 commitments were top 100 guys. I think the excitement that it was going to be like a super highly ranked class was there. I know I thought the same. They actually are still in on way more top 100 type guys than they usually are, in my opinion.
Yeah.
from a ranking, rating, and like average standpoint, I feel like it's still probably going to hover somewhere around the top 10, just because they're taking guys that aren't highly ranked. That's just what it is. They've always done that. They don't care where a kid's ranked; they're going to take him. And we talked about a few guys earlier that they're not one bit concerned about that. I think people with that in mind maybe want to readjust their expectations that Michigan's ever going to sign like the number 2 class in the country or anything, because they're always going to seem to take a couple guys that are really lowly ranked just because they feel like they can turn them into players. So, and that hurts. I mean, that's just a fact. Those numbers hurt that recruiting ranking for whatever reason, good or bad, but it does, right? But again, Michigan doesn't seem to care, and I don't really think they should.
And as of this morning, this class pretty much ranked number 11 nationally everywhere, I think. Number 4 in the Big Ten, which may be more concerning. A lot of my listeners, though, seem to be, bummed with that ranking. I hear about that. But we compare everything with Ohio State, our recruiting fans. So it's a good class right now, but it still does have the potential to be a top 10 class easily, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, there's we talk about guys like Edwards, Spindler, David Koff. There's 6-7 guys hovering around the top 150 that Michigan is big time threat for, and if they even get, say there's 7, I don't know how many exactly there are, but if they get 4 of those guys even, I mean, it's going to be a higher class that's ranked higher than last year's class, which I think they love last year's class. So I would just say to stop comparing it to Ohio State now. I mean, it's just a fact. I mean, what they're doing right now is, it's for whatever reason, it's crazy. I mean, it's unprecedented in the Big Ten. So need to stop comparing it to Ohio State for a while, see where things go, and just go from there. It's strictly from a recruiting standpoint. I mean, they're putting together an amazing class right now. There's just no other way to put it. So, we've talked about this before. There's a concentrated group of like 5 schools right now. They're recruiting at a much higher level than everybody else. You've got Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, LSU kind of in that mix now too, I think. And then every cycle there's 1 or 2 programs that recruit like a really, really good class. I think Florida's one who's in line to maybe join that group this cycle. Oregon has capitalized on USC and UCLA being garbage and have recruited the West Coast really, really well. Ironic thing, take it for whatever it's worth, almost all those programs are led by former Nick Saban assistants. It's always kind of interesting to me. You got Cristobal at Oregon. I mean, Dabo coached at Alabama. I think he played at Alabama. Kirby Smart, obviously the direct connection. Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee. Is Tennessee's recruiting better than they have in a really long time? It's always interesting to me. All these programs are led by guys who coach under Saban, so kind of interesting stuff. But yeah, as far as what Ohio State's doing, Michigan is not going to catch them from strictly a recruiting ranking standpoint anytime soon, in my opinion. That's just a fact.
Well, a last question for you, Steve, and it's the one I get the most often. I think everyone is asking, and I have no clue, but how long do you think it will be before we get some direction or a decision or plan on what kind of a college football season we might have?
Yeah. Hey, random Michigan recruiting guy will have the best answer possible, right? No, I mean, I suspect it's got to be sometime. You're setting contingency plans, that type of deal. It's got to be sometime in the near future, you would think. There'd be at least be some, they can't cobble it together at the last minute, So I would suspect, I don't know, maybe by this time next month, there'd be a clearer picture of what the potential college football season might look like. I mean, you got to think that that's, with all the money on the line and, with how important this is and a lot of other, it's like, that they're at least trying to hash out, what can we do? How can it be done? Like right now, probably literally as we speak, so I would suspect sometime before the actual summer hits that we'll have some kind of idea of where this might go. That's my guess. As
always, it is great to have our guest today, Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports, with a lot of good information. And Steve, we look forward to our next visit soon.
No problem, Mike.
Thanks to Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports for being our guest today. He is simply the best when it comes to Michigan football recruiting news, and he will be back next month with another update. Don't forget to rate or review the show wherever you get your podcasts from. Our free show app is available in the Google Play and iTunes stores and can also be heard on iHeart, Stitcher, Spotify, Spreaker, and Radio.com. That will do it for now. Thanks for taking time to listen, and once again, be safe and stay positive. Spring is here, sort of, in most areas of the country, and stay at home will be ending in the next few weeks. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Until next time, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!